Welcome to the Ada Bible Church Beyond the Weekend podcast, where we debrief the sermon, focusing on extra points of connection and what there just wasn't time for in the message. We hope this podcast will encourage you to study God's Word and grow your relationship with Him. You'll appreciate the conversation most if you've already heard the weekend sermon, and you can find that link in the show notes. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Beyond the Weekend podcast.
Welcome back to the Beyond the Weekend podcast. I'm Stephen, and joining me today is my co-host, Amelia. Amelia, we have officially hit the halfway point of this series.
I can't even believe it. Feels like we just started. And I have loved this series and the practical nature of all of these prayers. And if you've been following along with us and doing the 50 days of prayer, I also love that we're praying together as a church. And those prayer prompts in the Beyond the Weekend every day have been just such a good challenge for our team to write and really sit with. And I hope you've been actually praying them. I had a conversation with a friend Saturday night, and we had talked about the sermon last week. And then the first thing she says, okay, that prayer, like, how often did you pray it this week? And I was like, every day. I've just been amazed at how each week that prayer is exactly what I need. And she and I were talking about that same in her life, how every day last week she had needed that prayer and just God met her in it in really practical ways. And so I hope you're joining us along as we do this together. And it's been changing me as I pray them too.
Well, and I think that was the goal. They're super practical prayers. And so this is just how do we equip ourselves with the tools we need to have that kind of healthy prayer life. You know, thinking through like the Lord's Prayer, that's a super practical prayer. It doesn't have to be rote. You can add things onto those different clauses. Learning how to lament, taking the things that we don't like about the world or about our situation to God, super practical. That phrase from Jeff's sermon from Jehoshaphat is, I don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. I mean, how often do we find ourselves in a situation like, I don't know what to do, but just that reminder to keep our eyes on God. And then this week we looked at the prayer of dedication to the temple and came out with the Acts prayer model. And, I'm just thinking of how practical that is. I think I learned that. I think my third grade teacher at the Christian school I grew up with taught us all that, gave us all Acts prayer journals and had us work on that throughout the course of that year. So that one's a little bit personal for me as well.
Yeah, they're all meant to be a springboard. And in the Beyond the Weekend prompts, a lot of times we've been start with Solomon's words and use this as a fill in the blank or to get you going. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I sit down to pray and I just don't even know where to start. And so starting with the words of Scripture has been so helpful to then build on my prayer life.
Well, and sometimes we think it's cheating to do that. And it's like, no, you have permission to pray prayers from the Bible because we see people in the Bible pulling other parts of the Bible and praying them as prayers too. And so it's not cheating to use the Bible in your conversations with God. So this week's conversation is about Solomon dedicating the temple in 1 Kings 8. And now I think, we talked a little bit in our conversation with Aaron about kind of what happened after that. But what happened, like how did we get there?
Yeah, as I was reading the context before we were writing Beyond the Weekend and getting into the podcast, I read some of the chapters before Solomon's prayer to get the context of where we were and just saw, one, how long it took him to build the temple. It took him 7 years to build it. And I think of that in the context of I've been on staff now at Ada Bible Church for 7 years. And if I think of, what if it had taken us 7 years to build one of our buildings? I think it's helpful to take the Bible and put it in context of what that was really like, because we can just read it and like, oh, it's one verse, like he took him 7 years and then you're on to the next. But really pause, what does that mean? 7 years, the length of time and care and attention to build the building. And then it also mentions that they had been in the land, in Israel, in the promised land for 480 years. So by the time the temple is built, Israel has been in the promised land for 487 years without a temple. And we gloss over that in just a verse or two, but stop and think what that would be like. God has been dwelling in a tabernacle, in this mobile tent, for 487 years. And the significance of finally having a temple. And you think of America is 250 years old this year. Double that. Like how long that is in distant memory for those Israelites when they came, they've been hearing these stories for almost 500 years of coming out of slavery and God being dwelling in the tabernacle. I find it so helpful to sit with the magnitude of it and not just skim through verse after verse. And then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. But what is that like? 250 years of America's history times almost 2. Like how long ago the Revolutionary War. I mean, we don't know anybody. You know, we don't have people in our family who fought in that we personally know. And so you just put in that context of that amount of time, how significant this was, then to finally have a temple, a permanent dwelling place for God's presence.
I mean, and that really represents what God's trying to do. And we'll talk about that a little bit inside of our conversation with Aaron about what is God trying to accomplish through this temple. Okay. So we talked about in our conversation a few things that stuck out for us. So we dug into the temple a little bit. We talked about the promises behind it. We talked about that idea of where is God going to live. And then we talked about the purpose of prayer. And so I think it's going to be a really great conversation for everybody to listen to. But first, Amelia, week 4. A 10-word sermon summary.
I was hoping I could just give a lot of history and then we could bail on the 10-word summary.
Not going to let you miss it.
Okay. It's not very creative. It's Monday. Didn't have a lot of brain power, but here's what I came up with. Practicing worship, supplication, and confession builds a healthy prayer life.
I mean, that's pretty good.
It's just the facts.
For a Monday. All right, 10 words. Great job. Let's jump into our conversation with Pastor Aaron now. Well, hey, Aaron, welcome back to the podcast.
It's good to be here.
So I am thinking, because you talked about key ingredients.
Yeah.
And sometimes missing key ingredients.
That's right.
If the two of you have ever done anything but left out a very key ingredient.
My kids know. Well, they're young adults now, but they knew in high school to sign me up for paper plates and napkins. I'm the plasticware mom. So that should tell you everything you need to know, because like back in 7th grade, my first cooking adventure, back in home ec class, some of our younger listeners won't even know what that is, but like to teach you how to be domesticated, I guess.
It hasn't stuck.
And class
That's one way you could say that.
Yeah. It didn't work. Clearly didn't work for me. And we got this recipe for a coffee cake, and I'm like, 7th grade, I'm gonna make coffee cake for my family. And we're sitting at the breakfast table, and they're all eating it, trying to be nice. And finally, my mom's like, show me the recipe. You did something really wrong. And she's reading through it, and she's like, baking soda. Did you use baking soda or baking powder? And I'm like, there's a difference?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, that's it. I just quit.
Yeah, this is too hard. I'm out.
Yeah, the complexity of two things that start with the word baking.
You've been phoning it in ever since.
Yeah, just Meyer.
That's so good. Oh, man. The thing that actually comes to mind for me is not missing an ingredient, but adding the wrong one. And it's just, Katie and I laugh about this to this day, but I think it was the first time we ever tried to make a pie. So imagine us like newly married, you know, neither one of us is like very pro at cooking or baking. We decided to make a pie, and I think I was in charge of the deal. And I didn't know that you can either use pie filling, like the can of it, or you can use actual fruit and sugar. Well, I did both. And that pie to this day is called the sugar bomb, because I don't know if you've ever had something that has entirely too much sugar to the point that it's like disgusting, but that was this pie.
Burns your tongue.
Oh, it was like, whoa, this is terrible. Yeah. So that was fun.
You probably can't balance that out with enough ice cream. Like, it's not going to make it better.
No, there's no amount of whipped cream or ice cream that's going to fix that.
You know what this sugar needs? More sugar.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, yeah.
Mine is less of a cooking thing, but there are some key ingredients that you need to go on a bike ride sometimes. And I remember I was meeting, and this wasn't even a friend, it was another pastor. We were going to grab coffee, and then we both found out we liked biking. We're like, okay, let's meet and go for a mountain bike ride.
Yeah.
I get there, and I don't have my shoes.
Oh, man.
And you can't, like, I have clipless pedals. They're
Yeah.
just little tiny things. I can't ride without them. And so I'm like, we got two options. I can go back to my house, or I don't even remember what we did. I just remember the shame of showing up without my shoes.
Without the right gear.
I thought you said you were a biker.
You're right. So, there are key ingredients in cooking and in different things in life as well.
Sure.
Well, this was a really powerful weekend, I think, for our people, as we talked about some of the key ingredients for prayer, because I do think it is easy for prayer to get stale for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the Acts a little bit. We can get stuck on supplication. Sometimes we can get stuck on Thanksgiving or even other pieces too.
Yeah.
And just how those are kind of like I think you said like a healthy prayer life has all those ingredients inside of it. And I want to jump into that, but before we do, I have to confess something.
Uh-oh, here we go.
That was part of it, right? You're starting there.
That I went down a pretty big rabbit hole this week because I was thinking about Solomon's temple, and I'm like, do we have any evidence that Solomon's temple existed or not?
This is my shocked face that you went down an archaeological rabbit trail.
So I was like, is there any evidence that it existed? So I dug into it.
Okay, this is interesting because
Amelia got it. Good. There we go.
I see. I missed that one. I already had jumped to, we know where the temple is because I've been there with you, but you're not talking about that temple.
No.
You're talking about
Solomon's temple. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I know we've all been there, not together. Maybe
spot.
sometimes the three of us should go. But so Amelia, set the scene. What is it like now?
It's visible from pretty much anywhere in Jerusalem.
You're talking about the Temple
the
Mount.
current Temple Mount,
Yep.
which would be the same location, but way bigger. King Herod made it huge. And you can still see those walls. And currently it has the Dome of the Rock on it. So it gleams anywhere you go. And I know we probably all stood on the Mount of Olives across, and you just watch it glow and can see it from so far, and it's huge. It's beautiful. It can hold, I don't know, hundreds of thousands,
man.
like 400,000 or 500,000 people. I think they said will come for the big prayer times that they will have there on the mount. So it can hold like 500,000 people. I can only imagine how loud that is and how much that reverberates throughout the city. So it's like the pinnacle, the center of the city. Yeah. Still today.
Yeah, and okay, so it's there that Herod improved it, but Solomon builds it. David collects the stuff. So what evidence do we have? So we'll run through some nerdy stuff real quick.
Here we go. Nerdy.
You can
time.
hit that fast forward button if you need to.
I feel like we need like a theme song for this segment.
They know it's coming by now if you've listened. So start with, we haven't found Solomon's temple, and honestly I didn't expect we would, because we can date it pretty closely to when it was built. I think it was built from 966 to 959 BC. Mm-hmm. So that's about 2,985 years ago. And then if you know your Bible history, the Babylonians level it in 586.
Yep.
Zerubbabel rebuilds from the rubble.
Yep.
I remember that.
Wow.
You're on a roll today.
The archaeology jokes are just flying today.
So 70 years later, he builds it. It's called the Second Temple period in 516. Herod, who's known as Herod the Great, starts expanding that around 20 BC, and that's roughly the temple Jesus would have known then.
Yeah, that's right.
Though construction was still going on in Jesus' day. Then the Romans come in. They destroy the whole thing in 70 AD, just like Jesus predicts in Luke 21, which is why there's just a Temple Mount. Today, of course, they've had empires go in and out.
Yeah.
But also, you can't do excavations of it. It's one of the most contested pieces of ground anywhere.
Yeah.
So they're not letting you just go in there and take your shovel and see what happens.
Right.
So a couple things, pieces of evidence that I would say. The building plan is, scholars used to be like, oh, this building wouldn't have been built then. Mm-hmm. But we found multiple temples with like the same design and layout.
Yeah.
In fact, I was looking at my cultural studies, cultural background study Bible. Here it's an NIV. And right in that time period, there's a whole thing on the architecture of the temple. And it talks about some of these different temples that were found, I think one in Turkey and one in Syria maybe.
Mm-hmm. So these would be temples like pagan gods.
Pagan gods, but similar architecture.
Layout. Okay.
So it's like they didn't make this up, 500 to 1,000 years later about what it looks like. Second thing, Solomon, it says in the text, 1 Kings 5 and 7, that he didn't build it alone. The Phoenicians come and help him. And it describes these types of pillars and walls covered in palm and lily designs.
Yeah.
And we're finding, not we, like I'm there, no.
Yeah.
People are finding, This is like when you speak about your sports team.
It's
and
the
you use
royal
Right.
we.
Yeah,
right.
we use we. Yep.
We won the Super Bowl.
Right. It's that we. So they're finding these things coming out of the ground of carved stone capitals with a palm scroll design.
Okay.
Places that like people would recognize names like Megiddo, Hazor, Dan, and even in Jerusalem, all in that Phoenician style, which is what you'd expect.
Yep.
And then this is kind of the craziest part to me at all. And I don't remember hearing about this, but In 1999, the authority over the Temple Mount, and this gets to that mosque that I tried to go into.
That's right. I was there.
Yeah, bulldozed a corner down to build like a basement for this mosque with no archaeologists involved. So like you're supposed to in Israel, like everything has to get well, they got like a handshake approval, I think, from the prime minister to do this, but they didn't do any of that. So in the middle of the night, they're taking truckloads of this dirt out, and I think they dumped like 60 of them.
Oh my!
In the garbage dump, and that's all gone. They couldn't find it. Then they finally talked them to dump. I think they dumped like 250 of it in the Kidron Valley.
Okay.
And then these two professors, archaeologists, go there and get it, and they've been doing this thing called the sifting project, which you can find the website for it and see what's happening there.
Okay.
And they're finding things like First Temple pottery, a seal with old Hebrew letters. There's one thing that I was reading about, a names reference that's referenced in the Bible, arrowheads. And so like what that is showing us is that stuff was happening in the First Temple period on this site.
Okay. Yeah, I got you.
Which is meaningful because some people have thought, oh, this site wasn't even inhabited for thousands of years.
Right.
So that's the cool part, but it's also crazy to me that like they just were like, oh, we're just going to take all this dirt and dump it.
I don't understand how that happened.
And
That's wild.
And then the last thing, and I think we talked about this before, the Tel Dan Stele, found in 1993. And what that does is it gives evidence for David.
Yeah.
And it is a carving about a king who, from I believe Aram maybe, but I can't remember, who defeated the house of David.
Okay.
And so I thought that was really cool. And then I was like looking for those because I read that there's a Phoenician pillar in the Israel Archaeology Museum, which we went to when we were there. Did you go there?
We did too. Yeah, towards the end of our trip.
This is always the thing. You find out cool things in museums after you've gone there. And so I'm like scrolling back through my photos to see if I can find it. And I couldn't, but what I did find was a picture of the Tel Dan Stele.
Yeah.
So I have a picture of that as well. But I guess I need to go back to Jerusalem.
I would say so.
Spend some more time in that museum.
Yeah.
I just remember when we were at the Temple Mount, it's just a powerful experience. And then to go down to the Wailing Wall where the Jews will pray and cry and to just be part of that very respectfully. But I remember our Israeli guide being convinced that if they could dig, that if they could get to the things under the Temple Mount, that he's convinced they would find evidence of something that pointed to Solomon's temple. And it's this longing and this ache for the Israelis to find that, because they know that it's real, and the more you can dig, the more you will find of names and pieces that point to that.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, that's how archaeology works. It's just stuff is built on stuff, you know, because in history, you got limited resources. It's not like you're going to move to a whole new place to build something. You just go right on top of the other thing. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, when we've talked about Turkey, one of the reasons some of the best sites are still preserved in Turkey is because some of the places they didn't do that.
Yeah.
So like in my trip that I was just on and that we're going to be taking people on in February, you go to Smyrna, that's where you start, and that is a city. So you just get like a little glimpse.
Yep.
But then you end up in places like Laodicea, and that's just an abandoned, that they're digging everything up. And so that site is huge because there's not a city around there.
Right. Or same with Philippi in Greece. It's just this massive site because there was a huge earthquake that destroyed the city, and they actually did build somewhere else. Yeah. Which I don't remember what happened with Laodicea. It might be the same story.
Well, I think some trade routes moved around too, if I'm remembering.
It's like when they put in M6.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, we joke about that. That stuff has been happening for a long time.
What is it? Route 66.
Yeah.
It's actually, that's a better example.
Yeah, nobody's driving on that
You got
anymore.
Radiator Springs.
All right, we probably need to wrap up the nerd segment and get to more.
It wasn't as bad as it sometimes. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Thank you. All right. So we talked about, and you talked a little about this, but the God who keeps his covenant.
Yeah.
And that you talked about 2 verses, but it also kind of starts earlier than that, right?
Yeah, this was like a late breaking thing in my study is this phrase, God who keeps his covenant of love. First, it shows up in Deuteronomy, which is not technically a prayer, if I remember right, but it's language that is carried throughout the Old Testament. So then it shows up in Solomon's prayer, but then it shows up in Daniel's prayer, and it shows up in Nehemiah's prayer in the exact same format, which I just thought was very interesting, you know? And of course, anytime you see something repeated in the Bible, it's important, you know? You need to pay attention to that. And so I think it kind of just, that's why I came up with this, okay, prayer or worship is a key ingredient, you know, and in each one of these prayers at pivotal moments in Israel's history. You know, you got the temple, you have Daniel, you know, the people are in exile and he's crying out for God to bring them back into the land, which, by the way, that's going to be my next sermon. So Jeff will be up this weekend, and then we'll go to Daniel. And then Nehemiah, again, like he wants to go back. And you said Zerubbabel rebuilt the temple. Nehemiah helps rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. So I found it interesting. It's these critical moments when people are crying out for God to act on behalf of the people, and yet the first thing that comes out of their mouths is worship. And, you know, this is who God is and this is what he's like, which I think is profound challenge for us and encouragement of, like, you know, how we ought to think about prayer.
And you talked about starting with worship and who God is. And this could be another one that we do in our adoration this week, that you're the God who keeps his covenant of love. You're a covenant keeping God. And we think how significant the covenants are, those binding promises, and that they're described as covenants of love, which I think is another just defining trait we could worship God for, the God of love. But when you think of these covenants, there was a significant one that Solomon is pointing back to, of God keeping his promises to his father David.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's this Davidic covenant where David wants to build the temple.
Yep.
And God comes and says, no, you can't build the temple. Instead, I'm going to build a house for you. Like here, David wants to build a house for God, and God flips it and says, I'm going to build a house for you. And he doesn't mean this physical house, but the dynasty, the house of David that's on that stele that we were talking about. And Solomon is part of that. Solomon gets to build the temple, but he's part of that lineage. And then that covenant of love points all the way to Jesus, the one who will sit on the throne forever.
Jesus, the son of David. And
so the most ultimate picture of God keeping his covenant of love for us is Jesus in the gospel.
Yeah, and that's a great observation. And it's true that much of Solomon's prayer does focus on that specific promise, the Davidic covenant. So yeah, that's really good.
Well, and you see the promise fulfilled in Jesus, and then you can say, okay, if God is a God who keeps his promises.
Yeah.
And so that's the type of God, that's his character, his promise keeping. It's that always unfailing, never ending, never giving up, unstoppable, love that you talked about. But a lot of that is his ability to keep his promises and desire to keep his promises. So when we look in the New Testament, we can trust that he will keep those promises as well.
Yeah.
The types of things like we see in Revelation 21, that he will return and restore. And,
it's so good. I mean, the idea of God keeping his promises, it's like basically from page 1 all the way through. It's such a central theme, just Garden of Eden, the first sin. And then there's the bit about the serpent crusher, that God's going to send one who, the snake will bite his heel. But, and then, Abraham, I mean, just all the way through, it's just promises. And so it's like, if there's one thing that a follower of Jesus needs to anchor in on, it's that, okay, this God keeps his promises, and you can build your life on that.
That's good. Well, let's kind of transition toward the next thing that, from his prayer. And this is the idea that there's this question that Solomon asks, which I think is kind of unique. And he is really asking about, like, God, are you actually going to live here?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This prayer, it's really long, first off, and there's so much to it. You could probably do a whole series on it. And it was tough for me to, think about and decide what to include in the sermon, what to, not. And this was one of the things that I really wanted to, but I ended up not. But Solomon, I don't have the reference in front of me, but Solomon essentially asks this question, hey, I'm building this temple for you, but are you really going to live here? And it kind of begs the question, like, where does God live?
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting question. So who knows the answer to that question?
Only God.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So the reason I chose the language I did in the sermon is, I kind of worded it like God chose to focus his presence at the tabernacle or at the temple, because, in the scriptures, it's like God's presence is sometimes talked about in the temple. Sometimes it's talked about in heaven. Sometimes it's talked about just being everywhere. You know what I mean? So it's hard to pin it down. And in a sense, they're kind of all true. And I think that even as you talk about heaven, it's not, growing up, I would think of heaven as like somewhere in outer space, like far away, but like the place where God lives. And I think it's more accurate to understanding is like this overlap, this spiritual domain or realm that overlaps the physical. And so like always God is close. And the temple, I think, is like a focal point of that overlap. You know what I'm saying? And so that's how I think of it. I don't know how you guys would describe it or maybe contradict the heresy I just said or whatever.
Well, as you were talking, it made me think of how John opens his gospel in John chapter 1, where he says, and God became flesh and made his dwelling among us, or tabernacled among us. And so Jesus being another example of the living, breathing temple walking among us, and this focus of his presence in a physical body. And so when you think of the beauty of the temple, Solomon's temple, and how it's described, all the gold and cedar and bronze, and then you think Jesus gives us this picture of God's presence among us, and then that we become the temple.
That's just where it gets mind-blowing.
Yeah. It's like, how can you, God, you are everywhere. I think in the Psalms somewhere, David says, where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the highest heights, you're there. If I go to the lowest depths, you're there. I cannot flee your presence. Yet also there are these unique spaces where he really makes himself known. And just prior to Solomon praying that, we read that they brought the Ark of the Covenant, which had been, traveling with Israel and then in the land for hundreds of years. And the priests bring the Ark of the Covenant into the Holy of Holies. And God's glory fills the temple so much so the priests can't even do their work.
Right, yeah.
And so it's in front of that, then Solomon's praying, are you really going to dwell here? Like, I can't even wrap my head around what they just saw and heard.
Can you not see the giant holy cloud behind you?
But then to even be like, okay, like even in that, like, are you really going to dwell here? Like, who are you, Lord, that you would dwell among us? And then to see what he does in Jesus, I can't even wrap my head around it. And then to think that we are the temple.
Yeah, it's the same question. Are you really going to dwell here?
And then you
in our church?
Yeah, and that's just it. You take it one step farther to not just individual believers, but the community, the church. And Paul says, I think it's in Corinthians. I tried to write this down, then I forgot. Where he's teaching the Corinthians, like, you are God's field. You are God's building. All y'all together are also now the temple of God's building. And it just gives this greater weight to the glory that we carry in us as individual believers and together when we gather. And so, the fact that God wants to take even maybe a portion of his presence and focus it in us or in the temple, then is what other God does that?
Yeah. And I mean, it's such a theme in the Bible because, again, the garden is like the original temple. It's that sacred space. Similar language is used in the garden and in the temple in terms of like what the priests do, and it's this worship and it's work and it's all these things. And so you got the garden, this temple, then you have the tabernacle, then you have the temple, and then you have Jesus, like you were saying. And of course, the story ends with a temple crashing into earth, and it's like now the two are one, and it's like that. This is always God's intention, to dwell with his people, which is fascinating and beautiful, and kind of also just kind of reveals what life is really all about. Like living with God, connection with him, and it's pretty cool.
I think you talked about his nature is to be gracious toward us. And that's the whole idea of him dwelling among us isn't just pure grace. And so he creates us to dwell among us, and then we rebel because we're people. That's what we do. And he over and over again demonstrates his desire to dwell. If you do a word study on that, that's a lot of fun. He demonstrates his desire to recreate Eden. I think you and Jeff did a whole sermon series on the tabernacle representing the furniture in it.
That was a funny conversation, by the way. Jeff's like, I want to do a series. Okay, cool. What's it about? The furniture of the temple. I'm like, what?
But it's beautiful. The imagery is so rich.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
And it is just kind of a reminder of this is what I'm trying to create. This is what, and then of course, Jesus comes and dwells, all the things you just said, but it reveals that he's gracious toward us.
Mm-hmm.
He's a God of grace and mercy. And that's the type of God that you can love and adore.
Yeah.
And
right.
so, but if we forget to do it, and that's what's so powerful about those key ingredients. If we forget to do the adoration, we forget who God is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if our supplications are only just some kind of higher power who we haven't adored, then we start to think of them as a genie or a higher power.
Wow.
And we also forget when our supplications aren't answered. The lesson you talked about this weekend is that even our unanswered prayers are an act of grace. And if we think that God's just some kind of vending machine or something that dispenses and it's not giving us what we want, then we don't think it's a God of grace anymore. And that's, to me, one of the most powerful things about adoration is it just constantly reminds us of who God actually is so that we know who we're talking to when we get to supplication.
Wow, that's good.
And that's why it's a key ingredient. It's going to be like you threw baking soda in instead of baking powder.
Oh, way to bring that back.
You okay over there?
I'm all right. Yeah. Sorry, I can own it. I can confess my failures.
All right. Well, the last thing we wanted to talk about today was Solomon gives like what you'd call a purpose clause.
Yeah.
Inside of these verses. I think he does it twice, like in 43 and in 60. So what's going on there?
It's a good question. I'm pulling up Bible Gateway so I can remember the exact.
I can read it here. I have
go for it.
Yeah, it says, Solomon says, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name.
Yeah. And this is, it happens a couple times, like you said, but this is at basically the very end of the prayer. And it's almost like the purpose statement of the whole prayer, or the of the temple itself. Like what we've been talking about in the purpose statement is that all the peoples of the earth may know the Lord, that He is God, and that there is no other. And so I think the idea is the purpose of prayer is this. It's that we would be changed and transformed and live with God and acknowledge His dwelling so that the people who are far away might see Him more clearly. And this was Israel's whole purpose as a nation, right from the beginning with Abraham, I'm going to bless you so that all the peoples of the earth can be blessed. This is Jesus. He comes, and very early on, he starts saying crazy things like, I didn't come just for you, but also for, basically the Gentiles. And it's like, what? So it's always God is trying to pull in, and He wants to use His people in the way that He transforms them and dwells among them to pull people toward Him, because God wants to dwell with His people and with all of His creation. And so I found that idea very compelling, because it's like, what's the point of prayer? And there's a lot of results. There's a lot of benefits, and one is you might become closer with God. You might have some of your prayers answered. You might, there's a lot of things. But what if one of the main results, intentions of prayer is that through prayer, God might change us so that the people in our lives might see Him more clearly and come to know Him? That's pretty amazing.
That's powerful. And when I think of us as living, breathing, walking, talking temples, meant to be holy, living pure lives, not out of law or legalism, but to show what God is like and to show the world. And we've had this huge focus on sharing our faith, and we've been training people on how to share their faith. And we talk about prayer being such a key component of that. You're not on your own when you are sharing Jesus with somebody else. And we've had some great stories come out recently from as a result of our academy that we just did, the Ada Bible Academy on sharing your faith, and people who've shared, they've had people in their lives, family members, friends that just know are far from God. And through the class, they got some tools and equipping of how to share the gospel, but also we talk so much about Pray about it. Pray for these people. Ask God to give you a heart for the lost, and how these
Mm-hmm.
doors then have started opening for them to just naturally share their faith. And wherever you go, you're a walking, talking, living, breathing temple. And that opportunity to share your faith and share Jesus. That's the Great Commission, where Jesus said, go into all the world, baptizing, making disciples, and teaching them everything I've commanded. And that's the all nations, all people we see from the very beginning.
And we see the early church doing that. They took Jesus' word seriously.
Yeah.
Now, they needed a little bit of prodding because I don't think they fully understood it.
Right.
You know, like Peter has the sheet thing and the Cornelius, and Paul starts doing it, and they're like, oh, we're not sure you should do that. But they did do it, and it changed the world.
Yeah.
Like the world we have today is so ingrained and built upon Jesus that we can't.
His impact. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it doesn't mean that everybody's following Jesus, but the Jesus ethic of treating people, the way you want to be treated, and that kind of stuff is in the servant leadership. That's like crazy talk in the first century.
Oh yeah, that was not the Roman way.
No, it's not the Roman way at all. I've heard the slogan like, for Rome, peace came through hanging people on a cross, and Jesus brought peace by hanging on a cross. They're just so different.
Yeah.
Christopher Wright has a book called The Mission of God. It's a significant. It's one of those books you could call a tome.
Oh yeah.
It's a real book.
It's real.
And he lays out God's heart for this, starting right at the beginning, and he just traces it, through Scripture, how this is what God is after.
Yeah.
God is after all the people on earth knowing his name.
And you see it clearly in Jesus, the one thing that he gets really mad about at the temple.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be, I think he says, a house of prayer for all nations. And somehow they've turned it into this other thing, And I think that's a good reminder for all of us, in our spirituality, in our pursuit of Jesus, in our prayer, it really is about bringing other people to Jesus so that everybody can get to know him and experience life in him. And when we make it about something else or about ourselves or, our thing, we're totally missing the point.
Yeah.
One of the phrases that stood out to me in his prayer that he said repeatedly is this place that bears your name.
Yeah.
Over and over, this place that bears your name, and meant to represent to all nations who God is and what he's like. And then to think that we bear his name individually and as the church collectively, everything we do bears the name of Christ and represents him. And so what kind of temple are we?
Yeah.
And how are we representing his name in everything that we do and say? And that's a humble thing to recognize, that you bear the name of Christ and you represent him everywhere you go, whether it's at work or in your family or in your neighborhood and at church. And what kind of name are you representing?
Yeah, and that goes right back to the 10 Commandments. And I mean, the way that I read it is, do not take the Lord's name in vain. It probably has less to do with a way of saying God's name that's inappropriate. It has more to do with what you're saying, the way you carry and represent the God that you are now in a covenant relationship with.
And I feel like we need to just make it pretty clear that the temple was a building where God resided. And we can often look at our churches and swap church in for temple.
Yeah.
Okay, our churches should be changing the world. The things, the building almost, the corporate entity of the church should be changing the world. And yet that's the difference between what we see in the Old Testament, where God's Spirit filling a building, and we see in the New Testament God's Spirit filling a people. And Amelia, you said, Paul's instructions to 1 Corinthians is all y'all.
Yeah.
And he's often writing, except one or two exceptions, to the church. But it's not a church building. It's not this church corporation. In Michigan we have ecclesiastical corporations. But it's to the people of the church to change the world and to be. And so we shouldn't be waiting for the church building or the church corporation to be changing the world. It's on us as in our small groups and with our friend groups and things like that to be changing the world and to be representing God to the world. You don't have to have smoke coming off your head. You can find other ways to do it.
In fact, if you do, there might be some concern.
People might wonder. All right, well, That's a great spot for us to land. So I'm curious, Aaron,
Yeah.
what's one thing you want people to walk away with from this passage or a parting word about it?
Man, the thing that really I wanted to get across in the sermon was that piece on confession, and just immediately in the moment, don't hide, don't run, don't wait, just, confess and stay in alignment with God. There's no reason to create distance because you feel weird, because he's going to show up with his grace no matter what you bring to him.
That is so rich. Thank you so much for being here. We look forward to having you back in a couple weeks.
Sounds great. We'll see you.
Well, Amelia, Solomon's prayer is one of those prayers that I think if we could just sit with it for a long time and keep coming back to it over and over again, I think we'd continue to get things out of it.
I just really enjoyed reading the whole thing several times throughout the past week and again this morning. So rich in how he covers just absolutely everything. And I love where Aaron landed reminding us to confess, to not delay, to confess that we don't need to keep things from God, and how it restores that relationship, puts us back in alignment. And there was a season in my life, I was probably young adulthood, when that hit home. And I remember something had happened and I knew I had done something wrong. And in my head, I'm like, when I get home, I need to confess that and take time to pray to God. And the thought was, why not right now? Like as you're walking down the hallway in this moment, you can confess it right here. Because again, you have God's Spirit living in you, and you don't have to wait for a special time or a special place or a special location. I think, the temple, how beautiful it would have been to worship and pray there. Well, we don't have to have a special place to go and talk to God. It can be anywhere. And that moment just reminded me, when I'm right here walking down the hallway thinking about that thing, I cannot just think about that thing and that it was wrong. I can confess it to the Lord right there on the spot and not delay. And that's just been a reminder I've tried to take with me. We often talk about having your chair time or having a special place or somewhere to go to pray or being in a certain posture, which Solomon's prayer models some of that, raising his hands and his kneeling. But you can be sitting in your car. You can be having a conversation right here and in the moment confess something to God silently. You don't have to have a special time or place or location to go and confess and talk to God. And so that was just a great reminder. You don't have to delay. You can do it on the spot.
And it's not that you're saying don't have a special time and a special place, because those are the things that build habits and practices. And, but you don't have to wait to be in your special spot or your special place. It'd be like if you waited till the next time you saw somebody instead of shooting them a text, be like, hey, I'm really sorry about that. And it's really just that idea that relationships, you care about a relationship enough for it to be restored.
Yeah. And I love that you're talking about like building habits and routines. And I know that when life gets crazy and I get out of the habit or out of the routine, it's easy then for one day to turn into 2 or to turn into 5. And next thing I know, I haven't talked to God in days, and I'm waiting like, when I have that margin and I get back to that time where I can sit in that special space or go to that trail and take a walk, as opposed to doing it then and there. The spaces and places are great, and they do build habit and routine. But when you get out of the habit and the routine, don't wait for that perfect scenario. Don't wait for that special time. Do it then. And I find that taking steps back toward God, wherever I am, then help me build that habit and keep it going.
And that's probably a timely word for a lot of us, because we're kind of in the middle of this 50 days of prayer. And some of us may have gotten out of the habit, and we're like, well, I'm going to wait till I can go look at that prompt for the day. And you don't have to only pray the prompts.
Right.
The idea here is we're all joining together collectively with God. The prompts help draw us in together on the same idea and the same content. But if you're one of those people who are like, man, I kind of feel like I fell off the wagon, just take some time and pray right now.
Yeah.
And God's there with you. And you can start back up and jump back on the prompts tomorrow or even later today. But like you said, those things tend to snowball.
Yeah. So begin now. And that's just a great reminder that we are focusing on 50 days of prayer. And even if you aren't in your email that particular morning. You know the prayer that we prayed. You know the framework that we've been given for the week, wherever you are, even throughout the day. It doesn't have to just be once. I find myself praying these prayers as I'm driving in and as I'm coming back home from work, or in the morning when I first wake up. A lot of times that's my first thing, even before I get out of bed, just turning my thoughts towards God and praying those prayers and closing the evening. It can be all day throughout the day. It doesn't have to be just once or when you're reading your email or reading that prompt.
Mm-hmm. And that Acts framework, it's such a practical tool for people who are maybe like, I don't know where to start. One of the things I have noticed about it is often if I'm rushed in my prayer, I just want to do the supplication part. Mm-hmm. But if I'm rushed in a prayer, I have still found time to praise God for who he is. And sometimes that's all my prayers end up being. So instead of it just me going asking for God to help, like maybe I fall asleep praying at night.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that doesn't happen to anybody else, but at least I've kind of, the last thing I've done is recognized who God is and worshiped him for it. So, well, if you want to go any deeper on anything we've talked about, I did talk about a large book that you could check out. You can find all that stuff in the show notes and all the resources we've mentioned. And if anything else in the series has stirred up anything personally for you, maybe a question, or you're going through a hard season, or there's something about a need for support, feel free to reach out to our care team. We're always available. The email for that is care@adabible.org. And we're also in the midst of this 50 days of prayer. So I just encourage you, keep going on that. Like Amelia said, you can continue to sign up. You can jump in right now.
And I think, too, just remembering we have prayer teams on the weekend services. And I have the joy of serving on one at Cascade a couple times a month. And just what a joy it was to pray with several people after the service this weekend about different things and how the sermon had prompted, a call for confession or a call for obedience. And what a joy that is. And I know that can be scary, but to take that step forward and know that there are brothers and sisters who love you and want to pray with you.
Yeah, and I would just say, there are probably people listening to this who have felt the prompting to go forward and pray for prayer and haven't done it because maybe they're worried about what someone else will think or what that says about them. And that's not what this is for. Mm-hmm. It's not for people whose lives are just dumpster fires. Prayer is for all of us. We all need prayer. That's the power of a small group, a small community, the power of a church. It's just time to pray with another believer about something that's going on in your life. Whether that's a discernment or, a request or anything like that. It doesn't just have to be some big crisis that you're going through in life.
Yeah.
And so, all right, well, as we close out today, here's the prayer I want to leave us with. It is straight from Solomon himself. And he says in 1 Kings 8:30, "Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive." And so may that be our posture. Hear us, Lord, and we ask you to forgive us. And so we'll see you next week when Pastor Jeff will join us.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Ada Bible Church Beyond the Weekend podcast. We pray this conversation was helpful and encourages you throughout the week as you seek God's help to grow in His Word. You can find all resources mentioned in this episode in the show notes, including a link to this week's sermon and the current sermon series. We hope you'll join us next time for the Beyond the Weekend podcast.